Hello everyone, Falcon here. Welcome to the third build diary, Poison Edition. Alrighty, so first the TLDR. I would argue that poison damage is the best way to scale critical strike chaos spells later in the endgame. This is due to the way that poison magnitude is actually extremely easy to obtain in your gear, and the way the poison in general has been completely overhauled in PoE2. I would also argue that poison is actually one of the most genius design concepts that GGG has done to date. I am absolutely flabbergasted by how incredibly tightly the whole system works. It's so much better than PoE1, and over the course of this video I hope that some of you will also end up sharing my passion for this way of scaling damage. I think it's really cool. So just a TLDR for the people who don't want to go through my usual ramble and just want to get the gist of it. So basically, on jewels, you can very easily get chaos damage over time multiplier, or rather ailment multiplier, specifically because jewels can roll two different mods. One is generic ailment damage over time magnitude, and the other one is chaos damage ailment magnitude based on critical strikes. So if basically your initial hit was a crit, that mod will also apply. When you combine these two mods together on a single jewel, you can get up to 35% magnitude from a single jewel. This is an absolutely ridiculous amount of magnitude compared to how much chaos damage over time magnitude mods used to cost in PoE1. Secondly, there are some relatively easy ways to get quite a few poison stacks. So the first one being a special piece of glove, unique glove, which I think is a pretty low opportunity cost investment, which basically gives you the first stack. Then you can get the second stack very easily in the passive tree, and even a third one is probably easy, not so difficult to obtain. Later into the game, you could even do this with a support gem. And thirdly, lastly, there is a wheel in the passive tree, which I think is very, very powerful, which basically covers you for most of the things you need to apply poison. Once you have these three things, the beauty of poison is that you only need to have around 3 to 4 jewels with both of the mods for poison ailments, the gloves, the poison wheel on the passive tree, and that's it. If you do this, you can effectively double your overall DPS relative to just having a pure critical strike chaos spell. This is incredible. Like, this is so much better than how poison worked in PoE1. So yeah, if you think poison is cool, like if you want to play around with this, I definitely highly recommend you try. I think it's really powerful. There's a lot of opportunity here, and it's a way more interesting way to scale damage rather than just continuing to stack critical strike damage up to infinity, as I've been seeing other people have been doing who've been attempting this sort of build with Hexblast and Blood Mage. Okay, for the rest of you, this video is now going to be split into basically two parts. In the first part, I'm going to go into an extremely deep dive of how poison works in PoE2. I will even be showing spreadsheets, my very first spreadsheet for PoE2, showcasing some of the mathematics behind it. And after I've gone over poison and some tips in general of how you should approach this, how you should basically build around poison, afterwards I will show my current progress with my build. It is currently level 89. I've been able to do most pinnacle content so far. I haven't done tier 4 difficulty pinnacle bosses yet, just because I haven't had a lot of time to play the game. But anyways, we'll get there when we get there. So first, let me talk about poison. Alrighty, so let's go through it. Let's start with poison. So this is going to be a very deep dive where I go through all the fundamentals, like exactly how ailments work, how poison works, how you scale it in PoE2, and how are some practical tips basically of how you could push your build and how you could easily incorporate poison into it. I'm going to be contrasting it a lot to poison from Path of Exile 1 because I know that quite a few people who watch these diaries are Path of Exile 1 players. So to them, I think it should be very interesting just to understand the difference between the two. I think PoE2's approach, like the approach GGG took for ailments in PoE2 is far, far superior and more interesting than the way they approached them in PoE1. And I will explain that difference over the course of this as we go through it, okay? So, also there will be a spreadsheet. Here's a spreadsheet. Nice, right? Yeah, I'm gonna go through all of this eventually, so prepare to have your brain melted a little bit. But don't worry, it's not too scary. It's a pretty simple spreadsheet. Okay, so first I just get the bare basics out of the way. Like, what are ailments? Like, we're gonna go to that level of fundamentals, okay? So, ailments are basically applied by hits and they will deal damage over time, right? So it's like an additional way of dealing damage to an enemy. The way ailments work is that you have to have a chance to inflict an ailment. Now, for ailments, elemental ailments such as Ignite, Lightning, and Cold, you can actually inflict these ailments by just inflicting a critical strike. A critical strike inherently has some chance to inflict these ailments. I haven't looked into exactly what the chance is, but it's not 100%. Which is interesting because in PoE 1, a critical strike always inflicted the ailment of that element. So if you crit with fire damage, you 100% ignite it. As I understand in PoE2, this is not really the case. There's only a chance to inflict ignite. Poison, however, and I assume bleed, do not work like this. They work the same in PoE2 as they do in PoE1, which is that you need to have chance to poison. If you have 0 chance to poison in your gear, your chaos damage or physical damage will never inflict a poison. And why I mentioned these two specifically is because in the way it works is that basically poison, a chaos damage over time ailment, needs either physical damage or chaos damage to apply the poison itself, okay? If you have chance to poison. It's only these two damage types that basically contribute to your initial poison. So the way poison works is that it lasts for 2 seconds, and over the course of those 2 seconds, it will deal 40% of your initial hit damage. So it's basically the 4th paragraph here. The base magnitude of poison is chaos damage per second equal to 20% of your physical and chaos damage by the hit that inflicted it, okay? So 2 seconds, 20 seconds per second, 20% per second, 40% in total, okay? In a perfect world, where you basically just hit an enemy every 2 seconds, it will always basically, your hit will always deal 40% more damage, effectively, by just having 100% chance to poison. This is already pretty cool relative to PoE1. Now, we should first just understand where the base hit comes from, right? Like we're building this step by step. So the first step is applying the ailment, right? So you need to get chance to poison. You can get this on gear. So for example, these gloves have 20% chance to poison. You can get it using a support. So the support and Venom, 50% chance to poison. You can also get it in gear. So for example, where was it? Here we go. 8% chance to poison in the passive tree. You can also get it in jewels. Jewels have it. I think this one. Yeah, 8% chance to poison on hit. Okay, it goes up to 10% per jewel. So you have different ways to get chance to poison. You can then check it in your tooltip. So if we look at Hexblast, we expand it out, we remove Envenom, we can see a 53% chance to poison. Okay, but Envenom it's over 100%, so it just doesn't show on the tooltip at all. The critical strike does not affect your chance to inflict a poison, which again is pretty important to understand. Okay, so you get 100% poison chance, you will always poison. Okay, the poison hit itself. Now this is very, very important. There's a massive difference to how poison works in PoE2 from PoE1. In PoE1, the way it functioned with all ailments that dealt damage over time was that the base damage of an ailment, so the thing that we multiply by 40%, right, or 20% per second, was effectively this specific number. It was the base flat damage of the hit that applied the ailment. So if our Hexblast has 500 to 900 chaos damage, so average like 700 damage, on average in PoE1, your ailment will start with 700 chaos damage. That 700 then gets multiplied by 0.4, and that is your total damage, poison damage. Okay? This meant that critical strikes were not part of the equation. If you crit with your hit, the critical damage bonus was not scaling your ailment damage. This is really important because any reasonable build that did hit damage eventually scaled critical strikes. So you always had basically a choice. Either you scale the critical strikes, making your hits better, or you scale poisons, keeping the hits very low because you don't crit, and because critical strike bonus always went to around 400%, so this is like 5 times less damage than if you were scaling crit. Okay, then you basically just scaled your ailment. It was always a choice. You never really scaled both things. Now, there was a way to do this. There was a keystone called Perfect Agony, which made it so that your critical strike damage bonus affected your ailment magnitude. Sure, but that keystone came with a very heavy downside, which was 30% less damage, which is just huge. Like, this is a huge downside. And it also didn't scale like 1-to-1. It was only a percentage of it that actually increased your magnitude. So it wasn't really good. People were generally never using Perfect Agony. It was really, really a niche keystone. I have tried to use it many times. It never really worked out very well. In PoE2, Poison has that very, very special line, which basically says that this damage is calculated using the final damage dealt by the hit, but not any modifiers on the target that affect how much damage they will take from the hit. What does this mean? This means that in PoE2, critical strikes will apply to your ailment damage. This is a massive difference, like absolutely massive. It means that poison damage is no longer, like ailments are no longer a choice. It's not an or behavior. It's not or, like crit or ailment. Now it is crit and ailment if you so wish. Now, if you remember, if you watched my first video, the first diary on PoE2, I was making this whole point that when you're scaling DPS in PoE, it is very, very critical to scale many different things at the same time. You don't want to just scale, for example, increased damage, like increased spell damage and increased chaos damage. Because if you keep scaling this, all you did was you had your initial hit and you multiply it by, I don't know, let's say 500% increase. Okay, so this is 6 times more damage. However, if instead of having 500% increased damage, you had 200% increased damage, but then you also got 400% critical strike damage, what actually ended up happening was your base damage was multiplied times 3, and then another times 5 for the crit, which is 15 times more damage, which is way more. It always generally makes more sense in PoE to scale multiple things at the same time so that you have this multiplicative behavior. Increases will always eventually flatten out. So same with crit. You could scale crit to 800% damage bonus, sure. But what if you scale this only to 400% and then you scale something else to give you another 3x DPS increase? Well, that will be the same as if you had 1100% critical damage bonus. And I will make the case over the course of this video that you can pretty easily use poison to obtain 2 to 3 times more damage in a build. And it will cost you way less than having to obtain 700% increased damage bonus, a critical strike damage bonus, which is not even really realistic. It's not possible to get that much, I'm pretty sure. Okay? So anyway, so now we understand the base hit. So it's very important that it notes that but not any modifiers on the target that affect how much damage they will take from the hit, which means that you cannot double dip on something like Wither. If Wither increases your base hit damage, it will not basically apply to your base, it will not apply to the base hit that does the ailment, right? So for example, let's say you dealt 1000 chaos damage and you had 90% Wither. It will not be as if you applied 1900 damage and got such a base poison. However, what will happen is that those Wither stacks will affect your chaos damage over time, the poison. So nothing really changes. It's just that you can't double dip on it. But both will take effect. The crit will get increased by the Wither, so it will be 90% more damage. And then the poison itself will also get 90% more damage from the Wither. It just won't get 180% more damage on the poison specifically, okay? So you don't get double dips, but still, both of the things will benefit from Wither. Same way, both of these things will benefit from Despair. It will just not double dip again, because resistances, same as Wither, are basically things that affect the damage that a monster can take. it's very key to understand this distinction in PoE. It's a very complicated distinction. Most games don't have such a weird distinction. It makes things much more complicated. That basically there's a distinction of increasing the damage of your hit versus increasing the amount of damage that a monster can take. And for the purposes of ailments, the behavior is basically that you cannot double dip on the latter. An increase to damage taken by a mob will basically apply to the hit, but will not apply to the application of the ailment. But then it will apply to the ailment. So you basically always, like, both of the things benefit from it, but the second just doesn't double dip. Okay, I hope this was clear. I know, like, I'm repeating myself a lot here, but I just want to make sure that this is very, very clear, because it's really, really important to understand this mechanism. That basically, that resistances and wither stacks do not double dip, but they are still both useful to both things. Okay? Okay, so this is basically how we start with the poison. You get chance to poison, you apply the poison, it will deal your final critical strike final hit, considering crits, like the crits will get taken into account. And then, once you have this final damage, which doesn't apply, it doesn't consider wither yet and doesn't consider the resistance decreases, it will then take that hit, and it will take 20% of that hit, and it will deal that over the course of 1 second, and then another 20% over the second. So in total, 40% of that hit damage. Okay? So if you were hitting something once every 2 seconds, which means that you will always have a poison ticking on the mob, you are effectively dealing 40% more damage simply by having chance to poison. Okay? Now, 40% doesn't sound like too much, right? Because, for example, when we think about opportunity cost, on Hexblast, 50% cost a single support. Now, it's kind of funny to think about it in the sense that, for example, when you have something like, I don't know, 25% more cast speed, well, if your poison is 40% more damage and you have 50% chance, so this is 20%, right? So it's as if you got 20% more damage from Envenom, which is kind of close, actually, to cast speed. Okay, but we could do much better than that. Like, this is just where we start at. So we already started at a pretty nice point. Okay, so once you apply the poison, the idea is that you can then scale magnitude of poisons. Okay, so on the tree you can get 10% increased magnitude of poison. And there's a bunch of these. So yeah, we have a few nodes here. And most importantly, you can also get it on jewels. Now, it's very, very important to understand that in jewels, in PoE2, you can roll 2 completely separate mods which both affect your magnitude of damage over time. The first one is this generic one, increased magnitude of poison you inflict, which goes up to 15%. And then the second one goes up to 20%, and it requires the ailment to be inflicted with a critical hit. So you basically have 100% chance to poison. You then have, let's say, 50% chance to crit. If you don't crit, your poison will have 50% increased damage. If you crit, it will have 35% increased damage, like assuming you have these mods at maximum. Okay? Now, it's very important that this is 15% and this is 20%, because if you look at a jewel like this, which has critical spell damage bonus and critical damage bonus, these go to 20% each, which is in total 40%. So a cobalt jewel gives you up to 40% crit damage bonus, while an emerald jewel gives you up to 35% magnitude. The key to understand here is that these numbers are very similar. In PoE1, this was not the case. In PoE1, you could get like 20% critical strike damage bonus on a jewel. I don't remember right now the numbers. It's been months since I played PoE1, but it was something like 10-20%. But magnitude, you could only get like 3% magnitude, like 3 to 5% magnitude. It was a very, very small amount. In PoE2, GGG are giving us way, way more poison magnitude or just generic ailment magnitude than in PoE1. Okay? So this is very, very important. And this is specifically for poison that has like this whole thing of magnitude of poison you inflict. But I'm pretty sure, I remember seeing that Ignite has the same. Okay? So the point here is that if you scale crit, and then you scale poison on top of it, you can get these types of jewels that will make it very easy to scale quite a lot of magnitude. And now think about it. If the initial hit was 40% of your damage, right, over the course of 2 seconds. All you need to do is get 150% magnitude, which with this many joules, it would be like what, 5 to 6 joules, or around 12 mods or so. At that point, your poison is dealing effectively the same amount of damage as your initial hit, which means the poison is giving you double damage. So just with that magnitude, so just by having basically 100% chance to poison, okay, from something like Envenom, and having 150% magnitude, you can already double your damage. So you can think that this support that is 50% chance to poison is already 50% more damage. I hope you understand the logic here, right? Like if the poison is double damage, if it hits, then this 50% chance is 50% more damage, right? Because it, well, yeah, doubles your chance to poison. Suddenly this becomes the best support in the game, like by far. There's no other support in the game that gives you 50% more damage, right? So it's from that logic that we're approaching this, that just investing a little bit into magnitude and 150% magnitude is really not much. It's basically, it's similarly difficult to obtain as it is chaos, as it is critical strike damage bonus. But again, the whole point about magnitudes, like things multiplying against each other, you already have 400, in my case, I have 400% damage bonus already. If I want to double my damage, I need another 400% damage bonus. But if I were to double my damage using poison, I only need 150% more magnitude. 150% magnitude is much easier to get than 400% damage bonus, right? And okay, on top of this, I also need the Envenom support, but this is also like, this temporary. Eventually, I'm going to remove the support. I think this is a very expensive way to get poison damage chance, because again, each individual jewel can roll poison hit up to 10%. And you can also get some poison hit here. There's 8% here, 8% here, and I think there was one more. Yeah, these three already give you 24% chance to poison. So if you can get to 100% without using the support, then that's a huge win as well. But anyways, that's the whole point, okay? That essentially just with a bit of magnitude, you can essentially outcompete scaling just critical strike damage bonus. And again, I emphasize that this applies very specifically to poison. Now, I assume it also applies to ignites. I think ignites probably have the same mechanism. I haven't looked into it. I have no idea about bleeds. Okay. So this covers the initial hit damage. Now, there's another point to this. So I so far only mentioned magnitude, right? Like we're going stat by stat, right? Like stat by stat that applies to poisons. So first we talked about chance to poison, right? Next we talked about poison magnitude as another very important stat. Now, the third stat that matters to us is poison duration. So poisons start, as we noticed, at 2 seconds. However, on the tree, you can get poison duration. So, again, multiplicative stats. Either you get 150% poison magnitude to get your double damage, or you could just get 100% poison duration, right? If you get it via duration, that's again double damage, because then you will go from having, so in this case you need even less, so, well, no, not less, so you need 5 seconds, right? So by getting 150% poison duration, you will basically have 20% damage for 5 seconds, right? 5 seconds, 20%, again is 100%, again is double damage. So either you go magnitude or you go duration. Of course, again, it's PoE, so what you do is you get both. You multiply everything by each other, right? So your poison duration, if your magnitude is basically 0 increase, it has a value of, like, what is it? It has a value of, what was it? 40, yeah, 4%. 4% more damage per 10% increased poison duration. However, if you already had 100% increased magnitude, then suddenly this poison duration is twice as valuable, right? Now it goes from 4% more damage to 8% more damage. These mods, they become really, really, really powerful very, very quickly, just because we have this additional way of scaling damage. Like, it's very important that on poison, the duration is basically a more multiplier, as well as the magnitude is a more multiplier. And all of this is a more multiplier on top of critical strikes already. Okay? Okay. So, scale some duration, scale some magnitude, get 100% poison chance, And suddenly you will have a huge DPS increase, like an enormous DPS increase. Now, up to this point, you might be screaming at your screen right now that I forgot a very important point, which is this very, very, very key difference in Path of Exile 2 compared to Path of Exile 1, which is that in PoE2, you start out being able to apply only one poison at a time on an enemy, which is the same as how Ignite works, both in PoE1 and PoE2. So the point is that all the logic that I was explaining about poison duration scaling and scaling the magnitude, so if your poison lasts for 2 seconds because you don't scale your duration at all, right? That means that you basically only benefit from poison at maximum potential if your cast speed is 2 seconds. Or, thought in another way, if you deal damage once every 2 seconds. Because if your cast speed is 1 second, so you're casting like once per second, so on the first second, you will apply your first poison, right? It will deal 20% of your damage, like initially, before all the magnitudes. The second, you hit the enemy again, and what happens is that you do not apply a second poison that will tick over 2 seconds. What you do is you reset the duration of the initial poison. So the 2 seconds went down to 1 second, and now it got reset back to 2 seconds. So over time, you're dealing 20% of your DPS, like 20% more DPS per second, if you have a cast rate of 1. Okay? You're not getting 40%, but only 20%, because that's how much you deal per second. Okay? So duration, what would seem, is a negative, because, well, what's the point of duration? Because eventually you have too much cast rate. So for example, my Hexblast has 9-second cast time, which, by the way, some of you will be thinking, what the heck, this is way too high. Like, why is it so high? I'm purposefully not scaling cast time. I'm keeping it pretty high. So pretty much all the skills in PoE2, like most of them, have under 1 second cast time. Which means most skills in the game will not benefit from a 2-second poison by more than 50%, right? Like, you will only basically apply like half of it. The other half you're wasting because you're not applying the poison, you're just resetting the initial poison, okay? So, how do we go around this? How do we go around the fact that if we are, because think about it from this perspective, we want to keep scaling our initial hit damage, right? Like, we want to scale both of these things. We don't want to just suddenly stop scaling our hit and only scale the poison, because we want to keep double dipping. Like, we want to keep increasing our DPS fully, because it is still very valuable to increase the base hit because it benefits both the poison and the hit itself, if that makes sense. So cast rate is something that you will want to scale eventually, right? Like, this is an easy additional multiplier, right? From 0 cast rate to 100% increased cast speed, this is double damage again, right? So you don't want to waste this. And so the fact that poisons are so slow means, well, we need some way to circumvent this. And the way they did it in PoE2, which I think is a genius way of doing it, is that they made it very, very accessible to invest in increasing the amount of poison stacks you can have on an enemy. So what happens is that basically you now have a stat which is called targets can be affected by +1 of your poisons at the same time. So this basically is a stat that we could call maximum poison stacks on an enemy. In PoE1 there was no limit. You could just get infinite number of poisons. Well, okay, not infinite, there was some cap, but it was a ridiculous cap. So if your cast rate was ridiculous, you could get a ridiculous amount of poisons off at the same time. In PoE2, you have to invest for each individual stack. And the way you should think about these stacks is that essentially each stack halves the duration of the poison relative to your cast rate, if that makes sense. So think of it this way. Okay, we have a duration of 2 seconds and we have a cast rate of 1 second. So we are now only benefiting from poison at 50% of the efficiency. But if we have 2 stacks, what will happen after the first second, after the first Hexblast, the second Hexblast will apply the second stack. Once after another second we apply the third Hexblast, the initial poison stack, the first one, will have expired and now we will just reapply it again. So we'll always have in transient 2 poison stacks running, Each one is dealing 20% damage per second, 20% of our initial hit damage. So times 2 equals 40%. And we're back where we started. We have our 40% more damage from poison, while having a cast rate of 1 instead of a cast rate of 2. Okay? So basically the idea is that you have to scale your poison stacks relative to your poison duration as well as your cast rate, so that you always have the maximum amount of poisons you could apply on an enemy. An interesting point here is that chance to poison is also part of this equation. So I have two options. Either I get +1 poison at a time, or I just remove this support, right? Instead of having 100% chance to poison, I'm just going to give myself 50% chance to poison. Suddenly, at 50% chance to poison, it's fine to have a cast rate of 1, right? Because, well, I will always basically, over those 2 seconds, only one of the poisons is statistically going to get applied. The other cast is not going to apply the poison, right? I just paid a full support for this, and the support could be very huge, right? It could be like potentially 25% more damage, right? Like I could replace it like this, and okay, I still have 25% more damage, but now my poisons are less effective, but it doesn't matter because I could never have applied all these poisons in the first place, okay? So you have these trade-offs. How much poison chance do you want to have? How many stacks do you want to have? And the third consideration in this equation is the critical strike chance. Because, as we noted here, jewels have both of these mods. One of these mods is generic. Any damage will apply to increase your magnitude of poison. But the second mod requires you to critically hit to apply this second modifier to your magnitude. At this point, we're going to start looking at the spreadsheets. And the point will be that essentially you will probably scale in a similar amount both critical strike magnitude and regular magnitude. So what will happen is that some of your poisons, the ones that got applied off the crit, will deal substantially more damage than the ones that don't. Now, for this, the next fundamental point to understand about poison is that, assuming it works exactly the same way as it does in PoE1, and I have no reason to believe it doesn't, when you poison an enemy, and let us say that the hit does not crit, you then immediately hit the enemy again, and the second hit is now a crit. What will happen is that the duration of the poison will get reset, but the damage of the poison will now become this new damage value. This is now a point where I have to ask like the community. I'm very interested in this, like who has done the tests on this? It's very important to understand this. Is it still the case in PoE2, the same way as in PoE1, that from a programming perspective, if, for example, an enemy can only have 1 poison on them at a time, but let us say that you have a cast speed of 0.1, a cast time. So you can apply 10 poisons per second, but only 1 poison can be applied, like running on an enemy at the same time. Programmatically, in PoE1, and I still remember clear as day, it was Mark who specifically wrote a Reddit post at some point where he explained that the way it functioned was that programmatically, these poison stacks, the ones that don't apply, they are still on the enemy. Like the way it's coded is that if you applied 10 poisons, only 1 poison will deal damage at a time if you have only one maximum of 1 stack, right? So this was in the context of Ignite back then. But the other 9 poison stacks, they still exist on the enemy. Like they're kind of like coded in there. And what happens is that only the highest poison is actually dealing damage. Okay? So what this means is that even if you have 100% chance to poison and you are not able to, like your cast speed is so high that you're wasting some of these casts by reapplying a poison, which, well, you already are at full stack, so you're not doing anything other than resetting the duration, you will still benefit because you will have a statistical chance to increase the average damage of your poisons currently on the enemy by just having more of them, which are based on a critical chance or critical strike, because some of your critical strike, some of your poison magnitude is going to be based on the crit, on a crit, right? The crit poisons are more powerful than the non-crit poisons. In a perfect world, you just have 100% chance to poison, 100% chance to inflict a critical strike chance, and then both of those mods will always apply, and all the poisons will always be maximum damage. However, even amongst this, again, we have to think about this fact. You deal 500 to 900 damage. This is random. This is a randomly rolled number. And this is a pretty big difference, right? 500 to 900 is like, it's a lot. This is like 40% more damage on a high roll versus like, it's like 1x versus 1.4x between these two numbers. Well, no, it's way more than that. It's 1x versus like 1.8x. So there's like up to 80% damage. So you could deal up to 80% more damage if you get a very good roll versus having a very shitty roll. This is all part of the equation, right? So this is really, really complicated, actually. In a perfect world, you don't really, like if you were really balancing this to the absolute peak, like you're trying to maximize poison damage to the absolute maximum imaginable, you will not go for, like, you don't care about maximum, like you will not care about making your cast rate and poison durations like perfectly match so that you can never overcap your poisons, because you will always be just basically banking that what you're doing is always useful, because you're always updating your poisons. You're always basically giving yourself a chance to roll a higher poison, so that the poison stacks that are on the enemy are the strongest poisons that you have applied based on this random chance of either critically striking, like purely, is it a crit or not a crit, versus what did you roll with your flat damage, 500 or 900, okay? This is very complicated, and so doing this with a spreadsheet, like considering the fact of high rolling damage, this is already way too much, kinda. So I didn't do this in my spreadsheet. No one ever did this for PoE1, because we didn't have to, because we had this beautiful thing called Path of Building. So there was a community build tool where basically you could, you basically had like a simulator of your passive tree, like a simulator of your entire character. And it had these very complicated equations that basically computed your total DPS. Like it simulated the whole game, except for like actually running content. Like you weren't finding monsters, but you could simulate all these numbers. Like all the numbers that you get here, everything was in that tool, and so much more. Because here, for instance, the critical hit chance, like there's no number anywhere here that I could check that would tell me what is my average poison damage, right? Like I don't see this number. PoE, once PoB tool, Path of Building, it could give me my average poison damage. Now, I know, I saw the Reddit thread that Local Identity, which is the lead behind the Path of Building, at least the fork, plans to eventually create Path of Building for PoE2, which will basically make it so that we will never need these types of spreadsheets, but they will take their sweet time doing it. Because, well, this is this beautiful moment in PoE2 where we don't have that tool anymore yet, where we don't spend most of our playtime, like people like me, the way we play PoE, we spend most of our time using that tool. We don't actually spend it in game. We don't actually spend it clearing maps. We spend it tinkering with stats, like tinkering with supports, tinkering with jewels, and checking in PoB what gives us the best damage numbers. Until we have that, we have to do it ourselves, which means you have to be like, you have to be pretty like knowledgeable about the game to really know what is good and what is not good. Which means if you can understand spreadsheets like this, you will understand how powerful poison is, which means you will know that this is very worth investing into. These jewels that I have, so that look like this basically, and like this, and like this. I got all of these jewels for like 20 exels each or something. Some of these jewels I got very early in the league, like when I understood that this was a thing that I could do. I got them for like 5x or something. Some of these are way more expensive now, I think, but people still haven't really caught on fully. That these types of jewels, they are very, very powerful relative to these types of jewels, which are also really, really powerful, of course. But these are generally more hip, because these, well, everyone understands critical strike damage easily. Poison is not as easy to understand, that it is as valuable. at least for this particular type of build, which is a critical strike chaos build. Okay, so that's the point. So at this point, we have considered the base duration, like we talked about it. So at this point, I'm just going to go through the spreadsheet. Like I'm going to explain the mathematics here. So this is a spreadsheet for calculating how much damage does poison give you. Damage effect of poison. How much more damage do you have if you have poison chance? So for example, if this number was now 0, you're basically not dealing any additional damage with poisons, and so you're just dealing your base hit damage. But if your chance to poison, for example, is 0.5, you'll deal 60% more damage. And if it's 1, you will deal 2.2, so 120% more damage than you would with your original hit. The way I do this math works like this. So we go through the column. So we start with base duration, which is 2 seconds. We then look at our poison damage, which is 20% of our initial hit. We look at our poison limit. So this is the amount of poison stacks we can have. In my case, I have a total limit of 3 stacks for my Hexblast. I'm doing this calculation specifically for Hexblast. I then look at my cast speed. So how many casts per second, right? I then look at my poison chance. So I start at 0 and end up at 1, which is 100%. I then look at how much poison duration increase do I have in total. So my initial 2 is multiplied by 1.33. And if we look at our Hexblast here, it says in the tooltip I have 2.16 second poison duration. If I look here, new duration, it says the same number, 2.16, because this is 2 times 33 minus 25% reduction, divided by 100 plus 1, yada yada, regular stuff. So I have some increases and I have reductions. The reduction I have is because of this notable here, which is +1 poison, but poisons are shorter. So this is like a less multiplier to a poison in a sense, because our duration has been increasing, right? And the duration affects our total damage of a poison, but we get +1 stack, which we find very, very valuable. So it's +33 minus 25, add them together, multiply by the duration, you end up with 2.16, a very small increase to the duration. Next, I have my critical strike chance. And then I have my magnitude increase and my critical crit magnitude increase. So these I have here. Basically, I just took the increases I have. So I have 4 jewels that give me magnitude. And this is how much I get on the poison. And I think I have this inverted. Yeah, I think something here is messed up. I think probably this is probably 20 and this is 15. Because it doesn't make sense right now the way I wrote it. So it's probably... but anyways, I'll change it afterwards. So... critical magnitude, I then take the sum. So I have 61% increased magnitude if it is a crit, and 85% increased magnitude if it is not a crit. If it is both, like, okay, if it is a crit, it's actually like both of these will apply, right? So the total is going to be like 150% or so more damage, which is double, which is what I want to get double damage. I've considered all of this like pretty carefully. Okay, so we have magnitude increase, we have critical magnitude increase. Recent poisons. So I consider my cast speed, and I just consider how many poisons I will have recently. So about this, 1 point. I'm sorry, it's a little bit tangential, like I'm jumping around, but I hope you can follow along. So there's this other notable, which basically says increase poison duration for each poison you have inflicted recently. Recently is a very special keyword in PoE2. I don't know why did they not underline this. Like poison has these little underlines. Recently should really have it as well, which would just say recently means 4 seconds. Okay? It's the same as PoE1. So this says that for every poison you have inflicted within the last 4 seconds, your poison duration increases by 10%, up to 100%. So I have this very special, for me, very, very important row, which basically calculates, based on my cast speed, how many poisons will I have inflicted over the last 4 seconds. And actually, this number I completely forgot is also times poison chance. I completely forgot about that. There we go. Now it's correct. Okay. So we have the duration, we have recent poisons. We have poisons per second, which is basically we take our poison chance and we just multiply it by how many casts we have per second. Simple calculation. Then we look at maximum poisons. So we look at our new duration and we look at our poisons per second, and we can basically tell how many poisons could we have theoretically on an enemy running at the same time, right? So like every single second we're applying, so we're applying on average 1.1 poison per second. Each poison is 2 seconds, so in total there will be on average 2.4 poisons applied on an enemy at the same time. Now, this, if your poison stacks, poison limit was only 1, this number would actually be 1, right? Like this is the cap. And for this I have a calculation here, which is basically this minimum. I compare what is my max poisons, and I compare my poison limit, and I take the minimum between these two numbers. This isn't super precise. Like this is actually should be a little bit more complicated than that. But for the sake of simplicity, because I just needed a rough estimate, like a rough estimate is good enough for me, for now at least. I just needed this estimate that, okay, when I'm going to consider my total poison damage, I'm going to consider what is my stacks, like can I actually hit the limit? If I hit the limit, then it's going to be based on my poison limit. If I don't hit the limit, it's just based on what I actually have in this row, okay? I take this and then I basically check my non-crit damage against my crit damage, which is basically either I only consider this magnitude or I consider both of these magnitude mods. Based on this, I get two numbers. So this is total damage of a non-crit versus damage on the crit on average. Why does it look like this? It's because basically there's a high chance that I will actually not crit. So here, I'm not sure if I did a mistake somewhere in here. I think this should all be fine. At least if I remember, like the final math was fine. Anyways, I'll double check the numbers afterwards, but this is like a quick and dirty table. So just to give an idea, right? Okay, so we then take the average between these two numbers. So this is probably inverted. Probably one of these was, yeah, I don't know. I will check afterwards what was actually happening here. But we basically consider our average damage when we didn't crit, our average damage when we did crit, and then we consider the average between the two. And then at that point, basically, we take these two numbers. So we take our average, and we just divide it by 1. I don't remember why I did divide it by 1, but again, doesn't matter too much. And anyways, I end up with my number, which is 2.2% more damage. So double damage. Now, the important thing here is that after you have a row like this, what you do next is you start adding some kind of additional extras and you see how this will affect your damage. So the problem here was that my duration was very low. So even though my poison limit is 3, I'm only getting 4 poisons running at the same time, which is like, okay, it's less than I could actually do theoretically with my 0.9 cast speed. So then I consider the fact that because of this node, increased poison duration, and because I could get up to 4, like around 5 poisons, like 4 to 5 poisons applied recently, I can actually consider that my poison duration is actually not 33% increase, but around 73% increase. With this increase, suddenly I can actually have, at the same time, over 3 poisons per second. Now again, this number, it gets limited by the 3 poison limit, but now we have way more. And now suddenly, our total poison damage is actually very high. It's up to 3. 3%, up to, basically it's 3x multiplier to your DPS. Like you have 200% more damage, almost. Now again, I'm pretty sure that this number is probably wrong. I probably screwed something up here, so it's actually less than that. And when I look at my damage, I think it was something closer to 2. But again, for the sake of argument, just so you get the point, the calculation looks something like this. Again, I did this very quick and dirty, just to check. Then afterwards, what I like to do is I then add additional columns where I basically change just one of the stats. So for example, in this case, I only change my magnitude increase, while here I change only my critical magnitude increase. And then I check how much damage I gain. And from this, basically, I concluded that my non-hit, like the 15% generic magnitude, gives me more damage on average than if I got myself 20% crit magnitude. However, if my critical strike chance was, for example, 1 each, well, then this changes a little bit, right? Then suddenly the crit magnitude 20% is better. This would suggest now that my calculation is correct. So I'm really confused why I have it like this at 3.29. But anyways. So if chance was 1, okay, then crit magnitude is better, but in practice, it's never going to be a full 1. So this is less valuable, right? The critical 20% is less valuable than 50% generic, because this applies to both if you did crit and if you didn't crit, to both things. Okay? So you do something like this. Then, of course, we could go afterwards. We could add another column here where what we increase is 20% critical strike damage, for example. And then we just take that damage and we just multiply it by this more. And then, okay, we could compare how much benefit do we get from just investing into critical strikes instead of investing into poisons. And at the end, you will get some kind of like, you will end up with some kind of average, right? Like you will basically get some kind of idea of how valuable each stat is. But regardless, this spreadsheet basically just told me immediately that, okay, poison is really good. I should totally get enough poison to at least double my damage. If I do this, it should be cheaper than just getting more critical strike damage bonus. That's it. With that, I basically explained the fundamentals of poison. Like, this is all you really need to know, okay? So poison is really, really good. Like, it's extremely good. Specifically, if you do poison, if you do chaos crit spells, the same, I guess, applies to poison crit hits, right? Like it attacks, it doesn't matter whether it's a spell or not, because this applies to the ailment itself. It doesn't say anywhere here that it has to be a spell. Because you have both of these mods on a jewel, which will very easily, so in my case, at the cost of 4 jewels, 1, 2, 3, and 4, each having these 2 mods, as well as having this one wheel, as well as having these gloves, as well as having this envenom, a single support, my spreadsheet tells me that I deal triple damage. Okay? I am very happy with this investment. Now, I'm pretty sure it's triple damage. This could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, I would need to double check this number, but anyways, I'm pretty sure it was triple damage. Okay, so it's very worth it. Poison is a very nice way of basically just giving yourself additional damage on top of everything you had so far by sacrificing a bunch of your points and sacrificing a bunch of your jewels. With the jewels, I invested also in having poison hit, and then the final mod could be anything. It could also be duration, by the way, right? Like, and I have one jewel like this, which is probably the best jewel that I have for this. I think it's probably gonna be this one. Okay, it's not the best one. I don't have one that is perfect. A perfect jewel will have magnitude, duration, and poison chance. That would be the best one. So if you get, for example, about 5 such jewels, then it's gonna be insane. Then your poisons are going to definitely be like in the range of 4 times more damage. Like at that point, 3/4 of your damage are going to come from poison. That's because the poison is just going to be so much more damage, because these, all these durations and magnitudes, everything multiplies against each other, and you just end up with a ridiculous number. All while all increases to your base damages are still going to be valuable. They are still going to apply because the critical strike damage bonus is applying to your poisons, right? Okay. Now, the next part here is to just talk about some specifics. What do I recommend getting? So I think these gloves are really, really good. So you have to think about it in this sense. So as you increase your poison limit, right? So we have 3, 3, 3. So what if we now had one more column, and in this column we had 4 point duration, and let's say, I don't know, for whatever reason we beef up our duration, so let's say we have 70%. So now your max poisons are basically, this gets capped, right? So your poison damage gets capped by the 4. Okay, so something here is also a little bit wonky, but in this case it basically said that one additional stack gave you another, you went from 3 times more damage to 4 times more damage. This is an additional, but in this case you have to think about it, that it's no longer, it wasn't as if you had 3 times more damage and then you got another double damage on top of that. This is now kind of like an increase. So this additional +1 stack, this only gave you 33% more damage relative to what you had so far. So there are diminishing returns to getting poison stacks. The first poison stack is the most valuable because it doubles your poison DPS. The second stack gives you 50% more points in DPS because you went from 2 stacks in transient to 3 stacks in transient, right? The fourth stack is only 33% more damage. So at some point, it's not worth it anymore. I would wager that if you run poison, the single best notable you could anoint, the best anoint on an amulet is most likely going to be this one. The +1 poisons at the time, stacking toxins, because this is very hard to reach, right? Like this is too far. If you're playing a witch, I see no realistic build where it would make sense to go all the way down here. Because yeah, I don't know, like, okay, this node is cool, right? Like this is kind of cool, but most of these nodes are not very useful. Like there's no point to path all the way down here. However, a 4th poison stack is 33% more damage. Now, it's -20 magnitude, but it's very important to understand, again, keywords. This says reduced. It doesn't say less. If it said 20% less damage, magnitude, this would be a 20% less damage. So it would be 1.33 times 0.8. In total, this becomes really weak. Like the mod is not strong. But because it's only reduced, if you have, I don't know, 200% magnitude, this is just what, 10% less damage. No, even less than that. Yeah, actually, it's like 7%. 7% less damage from this line and 33% more damage from this line. Overall, it's a huge gain. It's like roughly 25% more damage from a single notable. So I think anointing is, if you go poison, is going to be this one, stacking toxins. However, this one requires an ire, and if we look at the currency exchange, this stuff is kind of bullshit. So delirium, you need isolation, and isolation in exalts is 300 exalts. This is expensive. This is free divines. So you will need to pay free divines to get 30% more damage or so, but it comes at opportunity cost. You could have spent it on something else, right? In my case, I have this, which is kind of shit actually, arcane mixtures. I should replace this very soon. Right now, I just have this for like a little bit more recharge. Ideally, you will get something else. Like for example, even this, Dark Entries is very good, but this is 2 isolations. This is even more expensive. So yeah, I think ideally you will get that on your amulet. I think these gloves are really good because they already give you chaos resistance, which is a very, very valuable stat. So this is not wasted. 20% poison hit is also very, very good. Losing 1 piece of gear on defenses, I don't think is a terrible thing. Like it's fine. So this is okay. I invested 4 jewel sockets into this because I really wanted the wither. So the other 3 jewels that I have, I think it's 3, right? 1, 2. Is it only 2 actually right now? Okay, so I'm only using 2 jewels for withered. So I have this jewel and I have this jewel. These 2 jewels give me around 30% wither increase. And then I have another 40% from here, which adds up in total, giving my withers go from 50% more damage to 90% more damage, which is plenty. I'm perfectly happy with that much from having those few jewels. So I think there's a trade-off here. Again, okay, I do have 3. So 1 wither here, 1 wither here, and 1 wither here. So 3 jewels I invest for wither, 4 jewels I invest for poison. And of course, these same jewels I also invest into my, for the most part, I invest them into critical strike bonus. And some other things that are useful. So for example, freeze build-up, skill duration, energy shield, everything is very valuable, right? Again, it's the same logic. We want to multiply everything, scale everything. But of course not too much. You don't want everything to only be increased by like a tiny fraction. Everything has to be like something in the range of like a double multiplier. Double by double by double is much better than 1.5 times 1.5 times, like, you know, just repeat this for 1,000 times. That's not going to be very good. But a few doubles is very good. So you don't go completely unreasonable, but poison, crit, withered, this already is very, very good. Okay, so basically get out on the jewels, prioritize ailment magnitude, ailment duration, and poison hit. Get this wheel is really good. I skip these 2 nodes because I'm already 100% poison hit chance. However, if I end up in a case where I will be happy having like, I don't know, 80% poison damage, poison chance, at some point, I will take these 2 nodes and I will just remove Envenom. And I will replace this with, for example, this. More cast rate. Another consideration that is worth thinking about is the fact that this cast rate, so cast speed was support I did not want to take because it increased my poison, it increased my cast rate, right? Which increases my mana pressure because my Hexblast is 171 mana and the same in life. It's too much. It's way too much. So I'm very happy to not have to use this support, but use this support because, yeah, I'm decreasing my overall mana pressure. This is another benefit of poison. If you're scaling poison, you are not pressured into scaling cast rate so much, which means you can afford having a low cast rate, which means you can afford having much lower mana. You don't need as much mana regeneration. So because of this, in my gear right now, I was able to like get rid of all chunk of mana regeneration. I have way less now than I had before. All because of poison, because it allowed me to decrease those other things. Okay? So yeah, this support, this... Another point, corpse weight. Part of the reason I was really keen to go into poison was because corpse weight applies poisons. Like, it's very important. Decompose as a skill, it very specifically says it poisons the enemies. Okay? This poison, I am certain 100%, it scales off all your mods that apply to poisons. I know this for a fact actually just because comorbidity applies to decompose. With comorbidity, plus these gloves, plus this passive, this notable, my decompose, as you probably saw in the videos when I was doing the clear, it was applying 4 poisons, which is insane. And the magnitude was applying on top of it. I had these very funny cases where, for example, I would... in Sanctum, you know, in Sanctum, the second boss, where you have a pair of bosses, I would target, kill the first boss, it would spawn a poison cloud, and a poison cloud would kill the second boss in like a millisecond. Like, it's just gone. In regular mapping, even like a magic mob that has a little bit of damage, like, you just hit it, you kill it, and the rare next to it would just explode immediately. Because of this, there is some additional tech here that you could think about, which is sacrifice. So there's this very interesting additional way of scaling this build, which is a way that I have not been doing, but is something I want to experiment with a little bit. I don't right now because my focus is a little bit too good. But instead of having a focus like this, which gives you increased damage and critical strike chance, you could go for a scepter. A scepter has cool benefits. The first one, it has malice. It could have the malice skill, which basically gives you 10% increased base crit chance, which is huge. This is like 80% more damage for crits. It's really high, right? The second benefit is that scepters have spirit. That spirit you could then spend on minions. You could get yourself a bunch of minions. So I need, what do I need? I need Spirit Gem. If you have a bunch of minions, you could then get this very nice little persistent buff called Sacrifice, which for 60 Spirit will make it so that you can basically use your minions as corpses. I know for a fact that this applies to corpse weight. So if you have Sacrifice as a buff running on you, and you have a Scepter, which basically makes it so that you have a bunch of these minions, right? And then you also sacrifice one of these minions for Malice, you will basically be able to apply corpse weight during bossing. And consider this, your corpse weight, if you're scaling poison, is going to apply like 4 stacks. Each stack scales your magnitude, scales your duration. This is crazy. This is actually really significant damage. Now, at the end of the day, I think Hexblast crits are still going to be far superior. This is more single target damage, but this is nothing to laugh at. This is additional damage that you can deal even single target. In clear, this is amazing. You saw in the video. The clear with corpse weight is now so ridiculous. By scaling poison, we are continuing to scale corpse weight into super endgame. Corpse weight is usually the way I kill all my rares. Like, I no longer need to Hexblast a rare. I just let Corpse Weight, the chain poisons, basically kill all my rares because it deals so much damage. So this is beautiful. So Corpse Weight becomes really good. These gloves help a lot. I stick with this helmet still. I think it's still very good. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so anyways, this wheel, 4 jewels, these gloves, have Corpse Weight, get the support, that's it. You have like double to triple damage of what you originally had. It's very good. I highly recommend Poison if you're doing a Hexblast build. I think it's very powerful. It's also very interesting because then you have this puzzle. You have a puzzle of what do you do, how do you balance your duration, your cast speed, your chance to poison, your crit chance, so that you basically have the optimum average increase of damage without sacrificing too much. Like, I am not sure. It is very possible that I could remove Envenom, swap it for Arcane Tempo, and I will have more damage. Like, I will probably statistically increase my damage. But this is complicated math. I haven't made the second spreadsheet. Like, I would need a second spreadsheet that would calculate all of these things, and it would consider, like, I don't know, the probabilities of increasing your poisons over time, that basically that I will high roll the chaos damage, like what is the average increase as I have applying more and more poisons. This is all very complicated. For now, I go with simple things that basically just prove to me that scaling poison is a good idea. And I can scale that instead of scaling critical strike bonus again over 400%. I think 400% is like peak. Like after 400%, I don't think there's any point in getting more. I don't think even 400% is enough. I think you could go less. I think you could go like 300% critical damage bonus, spend all the rest of your stats, basically, stat budget, to getting poison. Just beef up the poison, and you will get more damage overall. Okay, that concludes the poison part. The next part of the video is I'm just going to talk about my gear. What does this build look like right now? Like, I will go through everything again, same as I did in videos 1 and 2. So the last part of this video, I'm just going to talk about my gear and how it changed relative to the last video. Well, I'm not going to compare the differences too much. I'm just going to show off what I have so that you have an idea of what type of gear you need to be able to do some of this pinnacle content. In terms of content itself, I have completed the Fourth Sanctum. I actually did it before I made the transition to Poison. I did way before that. It was actually relatively easy once I was able to get some mana regeneration, so I wasn't running out by the middle of the fight. But this is the gear that you need if you want to do, for example, difficulty 2 Zest. I have attempted it and I just fucked up on the mechanics a little bit, but in terms of damage, I definitely had plenty. So you could totally like push breaches into difficulty 3. You could probably do simulacrums. I have a suspicion simulacrum is probably bad because corpse weight probably doesn't work in there. I don't know, but I know, like, for example, in regular maps, corpses, like the delirium mobs don't actually leave corpses, which means the corpse weight doesn't do anything, which is kind of sad. I was really banking on this because for breaches and rituals, like, this is what makes it so incredibly good. Like, this build really, really shines in those two mechanics because of corpse weight. So anyways, these 3 uniques, they're all cheap uniques. I don't know, maybe they're not cheap anymore, but when I bought them, they were all cheap. Everything was under 10 exalts. So what I did was I would buy not the regular versions, but I would get corrupted versions that rolled +1 socket. This is generally a cool thing. Like, if you have a build that has a lot of uniques, you should really maximize those uniques by just getting corrupted versions, which have some kind of really good bonus. Because, you know, there's always going to be, the market will be flooded with these uniques. There will be, and people want to sell them, so they just corrupt them. Instead of selling them for 1 exalt, they corrupt it, and then if it's a good corruption, they sell it for like a little bit more. So one of these I bought for like, I think 50 exalts or something, just because I really wanted the extra socket. So then you get an extra socket, which in my case, I use it for chaos resistances in most cases. Like things like chaos resistance, elemental resistance, I just use it for resistances. Okay, so yeah, I recommend that. Belt, so I don't know, randomly increased my belt a little bit. I got a second charm slot because I think it's very good to be able to be freeze immune as well as stun immune. This is kind of bad, by the way. I think it's kind of ridiculous that this charm doesn't block the initial stun. Like, you actually need, like you need to get stunned for this to apply, which means it only helps against chain stuns, which is so bad, because then means I still sometimes end up being stun chained somehow. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but anyways, I think both of these are pretty important, because I was getting chain stunned so many times that I think, and once I got this charm, it made it a little bit better, so I think it's very valuable to get +1 charm slot. I changed my chest piece to basically have mana regeneration, just higher stats in general. Like I wanted more resistances. This is just more than what I had before. I got this for like, I don't know, 50, 60 XLs or something. My rings, I focused on having cast speed, chaos damage, chaos resistance was a really big priority for me. This is one of the best rings like I have. Like I like that this only has one wasted stat, which is the evasion. Everything else is very useful. The other one has a wasted stat in fire damage. Everything else, again, is very useful. Also accuracy. I started investing a little bit into rarity. So this ring has 21% rarity, and these have a 35% increased rarity. The helmet has another 11% rarity. So I'm already at like 70% rarity or so, something in that ballpark, which is still far away from the 150% rarity soft cap. But you get like what, 36% from the Atlas, which means you already have like 100%. This is already pretty close to soft cap, right? So this is already like you're not trolling anymore. You'll double your loot effectively. If I remember with rarity, it was like 100% more rarity was like something like double loot essentially, at least when it came to currency. So some rarity was important, so I got some of that. Still get spell skill like levels, those are really valuable, right? A big update was with the focus, so I swapped a focus that would have increased damage. Now, why did I focus like this? So the idea is that this focus has total 200% increased damage. My wand has another 200% increased damage. So in total, I have like 500% spell damage total, like chaos spell damage. The point of this is that when you have so much increased damage from these two pieces of gear, it means that an individual piece of increased damage is going to be very like low value. So this is something very important. When you're making a build and you're scaling to build the late game, the way you have to think about it is you look at the nodes that you have available in the passive tree, and you think about whether you could obtain this stat in your gear. Initially, when your gear is bad, you will not have a lot of increases in your wand and your focus. Then, these nodes, which give you increased damage on the tree, are very valuable. But at some point, you can get a very large amount of this on the gear, which means that these wheels become very low value. At that point, you can take these wheels off and you swap it for something that is difficult to get on your gear. So for example, it would be, I don't know, a very good example is critical spell damage bonus. It is very difficult to get critical spell damage bonus on gear, right? Like when you think about this one, right? It's 200% increased damage versus 10% on the tree. This is 20 times more. You get 20 times more increase from a single piece of gear. There is no gear in this game that gives you 300% increased spell damage bonus, right? Like you can get like 30% on rings or something. Which means these stats are really valuable on the passive tree. This is how you have to think about it. That basically these are the types of nodes that have the highest value on the tree, which means you want to get gear that allows you to avoid these low value nodes and focus on these high value nodes like this and Wither Chance. Like Wither Effect, again, is a very powerful node. It's like 5% more damage, right? Same for poison. On the gear, I can get 20% poison hit. But that's it. Then I have to invest my support gem for this, which is very high opportunity cost, which means these nodes are also very valuable at some point. Duration is super valuable because, again, I can only get a little bit of duration on jewels, right? Like this jewel has 13% duration, and it caps out at 15. It's very little. Like it's not much duration, which means this node is very, very powerful. So you think about it like this. So basically, I wanted my focus to have a very large amount of increased damage, and I allowed myself to sacrifice some of the critical hit chance. This is also why I'm I'm not very keen on switching to Scepter, because the Scepter means that I will lose all this increased damage, and suddenly this stat becomes more important to me. I don't like that, because this means I would have to sacrifice something else. Like I would have to sacrifice my crit chance or my, God forbid, like my energy shield or something. I do not want to sacrifice that. It's very difficult for me to justify losing the focus. Nevertheless, the crit chance might make it worth it, right? Like if you can get closer to 100% crit chance, which you will if you go for Malice from Scepter, it might make sense. It's a calculation that someone has to make. I will probably make it at some point. I just don't have a lot of time these days to do this. So anyways, for now I stick like this. Other than that, nothing else here has changed. Flasks, okay, I'm kind of trolling by not increasing quality of these to 20%. I think for Mana Flask, this is the optimal thing you can have, which is more recovery if you're low mana. For the Life Flask, I would not do this because, well, you don't want to use the Life Flask when you're already super low life, because you could have a case where something hits you for 50%, and now you're scared that the next hit is going to kill you. So you want to immediately start recovering. So Life Flasks are something you start drinking much earlier than you do Mana Flasks. So I would not do that on Life Flasks. I just get increased amount recovered. Okay. Another point, I have a boot switch. So because Corpse Weight will not help you with bosses, well, both bosses, I have this boot switch, which I basically put on for something where I really need it. For example, Pinnacle boss, like Zest. For Zest, I take off these boots and I put on these boots, and I just have a little bit more defense and a bit more mobility. Makes perfect sense to me. These boots carried me through the final Sanctum against the Time Lord. Like, these were so good because of the reduced duration of freeze. Okay. Tree itself, I mean, nothing too special. So get this wheel, I think it's very good. Get more crit chance. I find it very funny that this Careful Assassin and this Throat Seeker, for me at least, it actually makes sense to have both of these. Like, they kind of cancel each other out, but both of them, like, they give you more than what you lose. So it actually makes sense to have both of these fully. Ingenuity, actually, I don't need it anymore, I think. No, I still do. Okay, so I balance it out, so I have intelligence exactly the amount I need for my current gems. Invest a little bit in energy shield because it's super powerful. Duration is still also very powerful. Yeah, crit, AoE. There's something interesting here. When we think about this particular wheel, like this constellation, I'm sure most people have already seen all these videos and everything that talked about timeless jewels. Not timeless jewels, but what was the other thing? What was it called? These things. Time lost jewels. So time lost jewels are very interesting because they make it so that basically the notables give you increased effects. So and the math was done that basically you have a wheel. If you have 3 notables near your time lost jewel, it is always going to be better than a regular jewel. So at some point, I think it makes sense to get this wheel again and get a time lost jewel in here. I just simply have not been able to acquire one that I would be very happy with. One option is if you get the poison ones, you could get, I think it was something in the range of 60% poison magnitude in total, which, okay, it's super good. An alternative is to get withered. You could get like a 21% increase wither effect, which is just straight up 10% wither effect at full stacks. That's very nice. It's 10% more damage of a single mod. Very nice. But it is mutually exclusive with the mods that give you poisoned magnitude, so it's kind of sad. So you have to pick one or the other. But I'm pretty sure poison magnitude is going to be the more valuable thing. Okay, so consider that. At some point, this wheel is very nice, like this constellation for time lost jewel. I have energy shield recharge rate because it's just very nice for mapping in general. I still have some recoup. Recoup is always good to have. Some maximum energy shield, a little bit more regeneration. This is very important. This wheel, I now realize, is super important because this area of effect of curses, like this applies to blasphemy. And this is like a ridiculous amount, right? Like this is 80% AoE, 100% increased AoE just out of 4 nodes. They apply to your blasphemy, and now you will be able to like hexblast things that are much further away from you. Very, very, very important wheel. I would never take this off. That's it for the passives. Ascendancy, once I got my 8 points, I just got Vitality Siphon. That's it. So far it seems useful. Maybe in another universe it might make sense to get Grasping Wounds instead of Vitality Siphon if you have a lot of regeneration. In my case, I need the sustain. I really need the sustain. So Vitality Siphon for me is very important. The other things here are not interesting. What else? Supports. I have the Power Siphon, nothing changed here from the last one. It just basically has these things like Soul Drains, Profusion, Life Drain. It's a filler. I don't use Power Siphon right now when I do anything. I'm just hoping GGG at some point do something with the skill and make it very useful. Decompose, I have AoE on it, Comorbidity, Bursting Plague, and Deadly Poison. So yeah, this is just like generic stuff. Deadly Poison works very well on Decompose, but it will not make that much sense if you use this on Hexblast. There you just lose too much of the original hit, which we want because we are still using Chaotic Freeze. It's very nice to be able to freeze stuff. My build right now can freeze Zest. Like I can actually freeze him during the encounter, which means that it still makes sense to make sure that your original hit is as high as possible. So don't go too overboard with like reinvesting. Like I would not reinvest. Like you could change all these passives, all these supports to be poison related supports. They're very good supports, right? Like poison supports are actually very, very nice. But I really want to have my original hit to still be strong just so I could do freezing, because the freezing is just so useful. Persistence is on the Contagion. If you look at the video, like if you scroll back to the start of the video where I was showing the clear, I have been using Contagion quite a bit for clear specifically. So basically, whenever you have Corpse Weight proccing poisons on enemies, I would then try to Contagion one of them and let my increased AoE make it so that Contagion just kind of spreads. So instead of using Corpse Weight's clouds to spread my poison, I use Contagions to spread the clouds. Some of the funniest footage I have, which I'm just too lazy to edit into this video, were cases where, for example, I was doing the Zest, right? Like for Zest, the whole breach. And I procced Contagion. And for the next like 20 seconds, I just walked and the Contagion was just killing everything. Like it was just chasing the breach. When you get these moments, it's just so beautiful. Which is also why I think if there was some kind of way, like if there was a way to sacrifice something so that you could have a cast on crit of some sort, so that you could automate Contagion so they would keep casting on mobs, it would be so powerful. It would be unbelievably powerful. Alas, that is currently very, very expensive to do. I see no realistic way of doing it, so I'm manually casting it. Hinder is also very nice. Hexblast and Venom, considered casting. Concentrated effect, inspiration. I have a switch. When I'm doing clear, I'm usually using Arcane Tempo for cast speed. When I'm doing a boss, I'm usually in consider casting. So normally I'm just sitting like this. I wanted to show this so that my numbers would align with what I have in the spreadsheet. But in general, most of the time I just have Arcane Tempo for the clear. For a difficult boss, I will have considered casting. Concentrated effect, yeah, and inspiration. Still, even after I have gotten Vampirism, I still think inspiration is still very important. I think at some point, if my gear improves even more, so for example, I don't know, I don't remember where I could change something. So for example, if I could get rid of the intelligence and strength here, like one of these two, and replace it with mana regeneration, if I could get mana regeneration here, and I don't know, mana regeneration one of these two, at some point maybe you could finally get rid of inspiration. But for now I still find it too important. Like it's still too difficult to sustain if you don't have it. Blink with Ingenuity, nothing special. Essence Drain, I don't really use this at all anymore, but anyways, it's there. Effigy. So this is important. So for Effigy, I still have Withering Touch, and now I use Overabundance. So you might be wondering why. Two reasons. First reason, this makes it so that you can basically stack up withers much faster, right? 2 effigies will give you maximum wither stacks much faster than 1 effigy. The second reason is this node. The effigies are helping me apply this node, stack it up to 100% faster. In my calculation, I basically argued that I only got 40% increased duration. In practice, I'm pretty sure this probably does go to 100%, 133%. It probably does. I'm not sure. I'm too lazy to test. Someone please do it and write in the comments. So just go to a mob, a boss, cast effigies, wait a few seconds until they apply 10 poisons, then cast a Hexblast, and check for how much time does it actually deal damage. Like record it and check the footage. If you see that it deals damage for like way longer than what your tooltip says, that means that the effigies were like properly applying and getting you to 100%. I don't know, it could be that it doesn't work, but assuming it works, this is powerful. And I got Ancestral Urgency just to place totems faster. Grim Feast is still very, very powerful. I would keep it. Withering Presence is also very important. Withering Presence also, by the way. So here's the thing. So I'm talking about sacrifice. You could probably, in theory, you could probably remove this and this. Like, currently as it stands, I think both Withering Presence and Grim Feast, like they're very, very valuable, but it might make sense to get rid of them so that you could get Sacrifice. So that you could then basically apply your corpses everywhere you go. But it's not enough, right? Like 60 Spirit just gives you Sacrifice, but you still need actual minions that you could detonate. So that's another like 20 Spirit. So it's kind of, it's rough, right? Like it's tough. But then again, if you do that and then you get rid of, I think somewhere else I had one more thing. Okay, Sigil, I don't have anything else anymore that I reserve Spirit for. But there might be a play here. Again, someone should check and report back. What would happen? Get rid of Withering Presence, get rid of Grim Feast, get Sacrifice, get a minion, start applying Corpse Weight on bosses, see how useful that is. It's a play. I will do this myself eventually, probably, but if someone else does it before me, that would be very nice. It would be just interesting to hear whether it works well. Other than that, that's it. I don't really have anything else to say. I'm also very tired. This video is way too long. I'm sorry. It always happens like this. Poison is very cool. I'm happy where this build is now. I think it's still not tanky enough. If you look at the stat sheet, I have 47% Chaos resistance. I think I mostly died to Chaos damage. I think I want 75, honestly, at some point. Energy is also way too low. 3,000 is too little. It should be like 6,000 or something. The thing that's interesting about this build is that outside of this scepter, like the wand being completely stupid because I got this wand so early in the league for like pennies. Like I got it by crafting, right? Like I bought a wand for like 2 exals and then I slammed another exalt on top of it and it hit, I think, what was it? I think it hit the cast speed or spell damage increase and it became like this ridiculous wand that is probably multiple divines. This focus costed me, I think, 1 divine. Everything else in this build is like under 50 exalts. Everything. Jewels included. All these jewels are also under 50 exalts. Many of them I bought for like 10 exalts. So this build overall, this is definitely in the range, like assuming, like if we ignore the wand, but again, the wand, like, okay, the killers are like +3 levels and the cast speed, which is what? Like this is like 50% more damage. If you get a worse version of this, maybe it will be like 20% more damage. It's still comparable, right? Like you don't necessarily need this wand for the build to be good. And if we remove the 1, I think this build is in the range of like 5 divines. Something in that ballpark. Maybe after this video, if like this picks off and people realize poison is very good, maybe some of these things will become more expensive. I don't know. I don't have the hubris to believe that I can influence the economy. Like I'm just posting random little videos on YouTube, so I don't think I will change anything in the market, so it should still be fine. You're probably safe doing this stuff. I think it's pretty cheap. Like I think this build, like the downside is I think it's too squishy. I think damage-wise it's good enough, like it has enough damage against everything, but it still dies too easily. But at the cost of something in the range of 5 divines, this is pretty good. Because I think like, okay, difficulty 2 Zest, and I'm also doing, by the way, I'm doing tier 18s. Like in the footage I showed it tier 17, which is a tier 16 map inside an irradiated map, Waystone. Irradiated, oh my god, a tier 16 Waystone inside irradiated field on the map, right? However, I have done a few maps where I had a case like this. So this is like the best case, which is, it's a boss, it has corruption, it has +1 from irradiation. You put a tier 16 map in this becomes tier 18. I have done maps like this. I died to the bosses because I just got one shot to random shit. But damage-wise, I felt like I had enough. So yeah, 5 divines is enough to kind of like in a scuffed way. By the way, level-wise, I'm level 89, and now I'm progressing towards 90. Like I finally started progressing pretty fine again with levels. So I think it's enough to get to level 90. Past that, like if you're really starting to push, like probably like tier, I don't know, like difficulty 4, Arbiter, Simulacrum, shit like that, you probably need to start pushing even more. 4 divine, like the 5 or so divines is not enough anymore. But that's intended, right? Like I personally do not think that the build that clears everything in the game should cost more than something in the ballpark of like 20, 30 hours of grinding or something. I don't know, something in that range. I usually think if a build takes more than that, it's too expensive. This build I would consider in the current economic scheme to be budget. It's pretty budget. So yeah, you can do most content in the game on a budget by doing Poison, Crit, Hexblast, Blood Mage. It works. I'm quite happy with it. My next video is probably not gonna come very soon. I will see. I will continue to work on this build. However, right now, I'm just not very happy with the state of the game. I love the systems. I love the way the tree works right now. I love the way poison works. I like the build. However, it is very difficult to progress. The way the economy works right now, it feels like if I want to make big, significant progress in my build, which is like to dramatically update my gear, dramatically update my jewels, just mapping is not enough. Like I'm gonna drop a divine every like hour or something, every 2 hours or something. It's not fast enough. It feels like if you want to make big progress, you need to like do something like, I don't know, drop an Adorned or something from the Trial Master. It's just not very interesting like that. And also just there's so many problems in the game, especially like with damage, with one-shots, with on-hit effects, that I think I will just kind of wait a little bit now. Like I'm playing the last few days like very little. Like I play like 1 to 2 hours per day, right? At most. So I just want to wait. I want to see what GGG does. Like, how do they rebalance the game? What do they change? As I see that happening, I will slowly, like, I will start working on the gear again. So the next video is probably gonna come once GGG do a balance patch. And then I, like, have invested a little bit of time of upgrading my gear so that I can do all content in the game. So, like, difficulty 4 Zest, completely destroy tier 18 maps, like, you know, everything. Like, complete decimation of everything. And be almost immortal, be able to do like, I don't know, go to level 95 or something. For now, my build is kind of stuck around 89. Like I will get to level 90, but I think 90, 91 will be very difficult. Like I will just die too often. Which means that the build is like, it's an endgame build, but it's not super endgame build. So that's kind of a shame. For that, I need more than like 5 divines of investment. I need more than that. Which is just too difficult to farm in the current landscape. So yeah, overall, still happy thoughts. I'm very happy with the build. Poison is very cool. I think it's very interesting. There are so many things we scale in this build. So many different attributes, so many mods that are useful. You could do so many things. I think Timeless Jewel specifically is something interesting to look at. I think there's a lot there. But again, this requires currency, and I am currently broke. I'm completely broke. I'm just not playing the game enough right now, and I don't want to, and I just have other real-life responsibilities. But I really wanted to get this video out of the way, because I just really wanted to share Poison and how it works, because I think it's so cool. Anyways, that's it for me. Please, others, try this stuff. Report to me what you find. Like, let me know how it works for you. Do some experiments. I really want to see what happens when you use a scepter and you scale Malice. I want to see what... Well, yeah, that's the only thing that's really interesting to me. Like, what happens with scepters? I also want to see more automation, whether someone would actually manage to somehow incorporate sacrifice into the build. I think once you use Scepter, you can probably like do that. That's the time when you do it. Make it so that you could do Contagion automatically. This would be very, very powerful, I think. If you could automate Contagion, at that point, I think this build should absolutely murder Simulacrum. This should be one of the best builds in the game for doing Simulacrum, I think, at that point. Because it just has like so much ability to just have these ridiculously powerful ailments that are just kind of spreading all over the place. And Dark Effigy, like these types of things, like it's so good at clear. Like this build shines at clear. That's its best thing, right? Okay, like it has this whole delay, like you have to wait for the corpses or you have to wait for the contagion, but overall you saw the mapping speed is pretty fast, and the big benefit is that it deals so much damage. So like what I started doing is a lot of my maps, I'm now applying oils on them, right? Like the distilled iron and shit. Like I'm making my maps delirious and I'm still wiping them completely. So this build should be really good against like really, really tanky maps, which is what you will end up with if you start using oils on maps. So yeah, that's it from me. I hope you learned stuff here. I hope it was insightful. I think the way Poison is done in PoE2 is absolutely nothing short of genius. It's very nice. It's very interesting. It doesn't feel bad investing into it. I see a puzzle here. I see that I shouldn't blindly update all my stats. Like, for example, even here, the decision. 8% poison chance versus 10% duration. What is better? I don't know. It's complicated. It's a very complicated formula to figure this out, which is fun. This is what makes the game very fun. It means that there's something to tinker at. That you can basically, you can increase your DPS, not by just getting better gear, but by being smarter. By spending time thinking about the build, about getting smarter, like getting better DPS increases. So, by answering this straight, this is my cue to basically end this video. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned something. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe or something because I really don't care. I am never going to be trying to make money or anything out of these videos. This is just for fun. Anyways, good luck, everyone.